Okay, I think I'm recording.
Okay, I'm recording too.
Perfect. How are we starting this one out?
Um,
And do we finally have a real name?
we came up with one, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
It's at the beginning of the episode that hasn't been posted yet.
Hi, and welcome to that thing we said last time.
Today's topic is food.
That's a super broad one, so we'll see where this takes us. Okay,
Okay.
then let's talk about food.
Yay.
Do you want to go first?
Okay, so I guess I'm going to start out by saying I enjoy food, all food. I have yet to come across food I don't like. The only exception to that is Lay's yogurt flavored potato chips, which are literally the worst thing on the planet.
See, it takes a special mind to think, I want to dip these potatoes in yogurt and then eat them.
Yeah, that's just no good.
No.
What I actually was going to say is, as this episode goes, if people are watching along on YouTube, the pictures of almost everything I ate while I spent a year in Asia and traveled around is going to be just going up on the screen. So I'm probably not going to put in specific photos of food as we talk about them.
Right.
All of the photos should be coming from the meals that I actually did eat.
Wow, that one looks delicious.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
Food, eh?
Yeah, turns out that every country eats. I guess I can talk a little bit about Japanese food if you would like.
Tell me about Japanese food.
Right. So the first thing when I studied abroad in Japan that I noticed day one walking along the street is there's not as much fast food here as in the US. You know, even in a small town like New Ulm, it's like, do you want to go to Burger King or McDonald's or Subway or other places?
Yeah, there's a lot of options.
Yeah, there's a ton of fast food options. You just go in, you tell them what they want, they give you it, and you leave or you sit down. Here in Japan, not so much. McDonald's exists. Their big competitor is actually Moss Burger, because nothing says, I'm hungry like Moss. I couldn't tell you what the Moss Burger is, but their food is gross. Fast food in general isn't super great here. The McDonald's is the same everywhere, so.
Asterisk.
It's basically the same everywhere.
It is basically the same everywhere.
It's surprisingly similar to American McDonald's, given that it's on the other side of the planet.
Yes.
If you just look at a Moss burger where they put this thick slice of tomato on top of it and then a gross sauce, and half their burgers are actually sausage burgers called hambagu, it's all gross. But thankfully, there aren't that many of them, and you can easily avoid them for other sources of food. In general, I really like Japanese food.
Yeah?
Aside from fish. Cooked fish is basically my one thing that I can't eat a lot of, which sounds ridiculous in a country surrounded by water that eats fish all the time, but you can actually get by pretty well without eating fish here. They like to do this thing called a teishoku, which is you get your main course, and then you get it with rice, and then you get soup, and then you get some pickled vegetables, and then you get some other vegetables, and then maybe you get some tea, and it's lovely. Haley and I have a place we like to go to called Amante, which is this small little European, quote-unquote, style cafe nearby, where they give us this teishoku, and it's delicious.
Where do most of your meals come from on a day-to-day basis?
Well, we cook our own food because it's way cheaper. You know, for maybe $70 a week, we can pretty comfortably make all our meals with leftovers and snacks, everything. But we usually go out to eat about once a week, and we try to go to different places every time. We've been to there's a couple Chinese places around here, which is very different than American Chinese food, and probably very different than Chinese food. They really like their noodle dishes, ramen-esque dishes, gyoza, and then there's probably, I would say 5 to 10 very, in the Japanese mind, Chinese dishes that they love to serve, like mapo tofu, sour pork, that kind of stuff. Pretty much every Chinese restaurant we've been to is exactly like that. But then there's also some bento places where you're probably going to get fried food and rice, convenience stores where you can buy a boxed lunch. Sorry, I said bento like you know what bento means, but if you don't know what bento means, it's a boxed lunch with like prepared things. At the convenience store, you can just buy one of those and they'll be like, "Do you want us to heat this up?" And you can be like, "Yes, please." And then they'll heat it up for you.
Like what type of things?
Well, it depends on the convenience store, but usually you're going to get at least one tonkatsu meal, which is like a deep fried pork cutlet with breading. And usually you can get some that maybe have sushi with them. You can get some that have chicken breast. You can get some... They don't eat a ton of pork and beef here. Beef's super expensive. So a lot of my favorite foods are non-existent. And then pork is more expensive than chicken, so it's less common, especially at like a convenience store. So you'll get a lot of chicken, a lot of... Maybe like if you're having pork at all, it'll be shredded, or like stuff like that hambagu I mentioned, where it's like they call it a hambagu because it's kind of like a hamburger, but it's made out of sausage and it tastes bad. And then you can also get like a tempura one that's like deep fried shrimp and vegetables with a tempura batter, which is really light and flaky. You can get karaage, they're deep fried chicken, which is very different. They use dark meat. It is very fatty. The first time I had it, I thought it was gross. And then the second time I had it, I thought it was okay. And now I prefer it. Now I prefer it American style. That's one of the things I'm going to miss most when I go back is the delicious deep fried chicken you can buy at every convenience store.
The American view, at least my American view of Japanese food, is basically sushi and ramen. But you're saying it's a lot more complex than that.
Right. Sushi is more of like I wouldn't say it's a specialty food, but like trying to think of something you could compare it to in America. Sushi isn't something you really make at home too much. You can, and some people do, but it's, so maybe it's kind of like pizza in the sense that you're much more likely to go to a special like sushi place for it.
Yep.
And there are levels to that. So there's like the kaiten sushi, where it's on a conveyor belt and it comes to you and you just take the plate off and eat it. And then there are like fancy places where they're like dressed up and you can pay $10 for some small sushi. But I don't really like raw fish a ton, or I didn't, but sushi here is delicious. All of it. I don't know. Like I can eat raw tuna, raw salmon. Squid is kind of hard because you have to chew it a lot, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do they eat a lot of rice there?
Oh, right. I should probably talk about that too. It's hard even to understand as an American at first how like integral rice is to food here. A lot of people will eat rice for breakfast. You'll have rice with pretty much every meal. There are, out in the rural areas like where we live, there are these small little like boxes basically, like less than 10 feet square inside. And they have like this little... I don't know what to call it. Like looks like a farm, like a grain elevator almost. And you can take your rice there and pour it in and it'll polish your rice for you. And I see people using it all the time. I'm not sure why you need to polish your rice. I think it means you don't have to wash it or rinse it. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. They have it with pretty much every meal. They have it for breakfast. And they'll ask you, do you have rice or bread for breakfast? This is a common question. Because some people have bread, some people have rice. But those are your options for breakfast. Haley and I found some cereal at a special bulk food store we go to. And on the side of the box, it tells you how to eat cereal. It's like, pour it into a bowl, then add milk for a simple breakfast. It's like, oh, that's how you eat cereal. I see. It's such a foreign concept that you wouldn't know how. But rice in general is so like... I when I first got here, I had people asking me, do you eat rice with every meal? Or what's your thing you eat with every meal? And then some other people were like, oh, it's bread, right? Bread is the thing you have with every meal. And I was like, well, I don't know. I feel like as Americans, we don't have this idea of this is the thing you must eat with every meal. Like, I guess we usually have some sort of dough, but I mean, we also like spaghetti, and I don't know if you could even call a hot dog bun still bread. It sort of defies conventions because it's mostly air and chemicals.
I think maybe a way people in America can think about it is I hear people describe themselves as kind of meat and potato people. It's like every meal, or
Right.
or probably not every meal, but like you always have your meat and your potatoes, and that's your dinner.
Right. Yeah, so it's sort of like potatoes, except we do potatoes and sometimes spaghetti and sometimes even rice and sometimes doughs, flour tortillas even. You know, there are just so many things that Americans use because we have this menagerie of cultures throwing their own carbohydrates in. But in Japan, I feel like the idea of rice is so ingrained as like the thing that fills you up in the meal that it's not uncommon for them to ask me.
You said ingrained.
I did.
So in China, well, part of our Chinese class, we were taught about staple foods.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the phrase they use, that rice or noodles are your staple food. And the instructor kind of asked us Americans, how would you define a staple food? And, you know, we say, well, for us, when I think of a staple food as an American, my thought is, well, that's the entree. That is the main part of the meal.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really what staple food means. Staple food is the additional extra food to fill you up. So you have whatever it is your meal, and then you're not full yet. And so you have some rice or you have some noodles, and that is what kind of fills up your stomach and keeps you good until your next meal.
Right.
When we went to restaurants as a group, we would always have to ask them to bring out the rice right away. Otherwise, they would wait until the end to bring out their thing of rice. And as Americans who like to eat a lot of everything, we'd want to mix our rice with the really spicy food, or we just want a little bit of rice to go with the rest of the stuff we're eating, kind of a little bit here, a little bit there.
Oh, that's interesting.
When I would eat food in the cafeteria at school, they would just have this giant, must have been like, I don't know, 20-gallon pot just full of rice that they would just keep filling up. And the person would take out a little bowl and clump it on your plate, and I think it was like 30 cents or whatever to add rice to your meal. 2 kwai. You know, I would always have a little bit of rice, and a lot of the other dishes just came with rice. The one barbecue place, it was always meat on rice, and it was either duck or pork, and it was on rice with cabbage, and that was the whole meal.
Right.
You're just your meat with a little bit of cabbage and rice.
Yeah, they do the same thing in Japan. It's called a don, which means like bowl. So you can get a beef one or a pork one or a chicken one. Or I even had a sea urchin one. That was gross. That was very gross.
I did find the food in Asia to be a lot more vegetable centric.
Yeah.
And that's something I've really noticed coming home, where I'm trying to cook more food just on my own in the kitchen. It's like, well, I eat a lot of meat.
Yeah, I have this funny memory. When I was studying abroad, they took us to a cooking class once. Japan loves to have these cooking classes. Like pretty much every community building, community center, of which there are many, even in small areas, has a cooking room, which has like maybe 6 places where you can, with 2 stovetops and a metal table, so you can cook stuff. And so we went there and started learning how to cook, like, I don't even remember what. We were talking with the old ladies who were teaching us, and I was like, oh yeah, well, Japan doesn't eat that much meat, so that was one thing that surprised us, is how little meat they eat. And the old lady was like, oh, you probably just, since you don't live in someone's house, you probably just don't realize how much meat the Japanese eat, but we eat a lot of meat. And in my head, I just did this huge belly laugh, like, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. When I was in Michigan, I was eating like a pound of meat every day, minimum. You don't even eat a pound of food every day. Yeah, meat is something that I sort of miss and will gladly return to in America.
The Chinese food was a lot of the meat was the pork in China. And to the point where actually, if you just say meat, it means pork.
Interesting.
If you're specifying chicken meat or lamb meat or cow meat, like that's, you add on to the word. But if you just say meat, you're generally referring to pork.
That's really interesting, because I feel like chicken is so much bigger here than pork or beef.
Yeah, I don't know how much chicken versus how much duck I had to eat while there. Not a huge fan of duck, but I did eat a lot of it.
Yeah, duck is seen as a very Chinese food here. Pretty much the only place you can get it.
I was just gonna say it tends to be a little bit darker meat, at least the portions I ate.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the town we were visiting on one of our day trips, but they had, I guess they were steaming pork or something, or it's just they got like the whole pig cut open over top of something and they're like roasting it, steaming it sort of deal.
Right.
That is very interesting to just see that on the side of the road.
Yeah, I can imagine. As Americans, we don't usually like to look at our food before we eat it.
No.
Like, we like to separate the idea of the animal and the food. We even have different words for it, thanks to the Normans.
One thing I noticed very early on, and I never got used to, was when eating dishes, it's usually a lot of different things mixed together, like pan-fried in a wok or like somehow cooked together. And so there would be chunks of meat, a lot of times pork, alongside your vegetables and other stuff, but the meat was never deboned.
Really?
So they would take either ribs or like the parts of the animals that you were eating, and it would be chopped up into little bite-sized pieces, but there's chunks of cartilage and bone and other stuff in there.
Ooh.
And if you're not paying attention, you like chomp down on that. You're like, oh, that was a mistake. I kind of got the sense they use the entire animal. They don't put a whole lot to waste in that regard.
Right.
And I never did really enjoy eating like the pig skin because there's the layer of fat and skin around the pig, and that would be cooked into some of these dishes as well. To the point where I found every now and then you see like a little bit of hair like coming up from the
Ooh, gross.
And you kind of ignore it and eat what you can. One day at lunch, I distinctly remember picking up a piece of meat with my chopsticks and realizing it was a pig teat.
Ooh, gross.
And I was like, nope, I cannot do this.
No, can't eat that one.
This is too much for today.
Yeah.
One of the other big foods China is famous for, I think, is hot pot. And a lot of people would like to go out and do group hot pots, and they have special pots that divide the pot into 3 or 4 separate sections so you can have different flavors or spice levels.
Oh, that's interesting.
So this person likes really spicy, this person likes a little spicy, and this person wants peanut butter in their stuff. So you got the 3 different sections. I never really got into it the way other people did, because you're basically just picking up some food off of either you're picking it off a menu or you're picking it out of a buffet, and then you're taking it to your table and you're dumping it into boiling water, and then you're fishing it out and you're eating it. It's a bunch of vegetables that are kind of okay. The meat options are usually like fish balls, just ground up fish into a meatball, and it just never was something where I'm like, this is really good. I was always like, this is okay.
They do something kind of like that in Japan, where I believe we took you on one of those, where you sit down in front of basically a grill, and then they give you a huge tray of raw meat.
Yes.
And then you cook your own meat. The first time I went to one of those was when I was studying abroad on my birthday, and I was enthralled because they had beef there. We went with the all you can eat thing for like $30, and they had beef and a chocolate fountain, and it was wonderful. No one could tell me how much beef to eat.
Is food and eating a communal activity in Japan?
I would say so. There are definitely certain kinds of food that are much more popular for that. A lot of places have this, like, enkai room, which is basically like for lack of a better word, a party room, where you get like 10 or 15 people and they can all sit at the same table, and maybe there are 3 grills on it and everyone can cook the food, or they all order the same thing and then they can all eat it together. And there are a lot of places that specifically cater to these parties. So whether it's a office group or a group of friends or classmates, I was invited to my one old friend I've made. He invited me to his class reunion, and so I got to go to it must have been like the 50th or 54th year reunion for a bunch of 68-year-olds, and that was very enlightening. All sat around a huge table. Yeah. So it definitely can be But there are also some places that sort of cater to the other side of things, because a lot of people in Japan don't particularly enjoy social interaction or having to talk to people. So, there are places around where there's a vending machine outside the front door, and you walk up to it, you throw in $5 or 500 yen, press a button, and then when you sit down, you hand them a ticket, and then they give you your meal when it's ready. There's no communication. You can kind of both pretend the other person doesn't exist aside from the polite greetings the workers give you.
I remember when I came to visit you when you were studying abroad, we went to that one ramen place, and the little booths were basically like cordoned off, so it's just you and this like very shallow little booth, and there was even a spigot for water, so you could just fill your own cup with water. And when your food was ready, a little slot opened up, and they just pushed the food out to you. It didn't even open high enough to like see who was behind it, and they just closed it back down again.
Ichiran ramen is so good. Every time Haley and I go to a place that has one, we swing by. And you have to go early, because if you go... We went to one at like 7:20 or so, the first time we went. Mm-hmm. And the line went from the seats back down their like spiral staircase near the bathrooms, and then started going back up, because they ran out of room down there. And it took like an hour to get to our food. It was awful.
Wow.
Yeah, but Ichiran is great. Maybe I should talk a little bit about what food you can't eat here.
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
In addition to all the things that are very popular, there are some things that as an American, I'm like, I can't eat that. And I mean, there's beef, but ground beef is actually pretty hard to find on its own because it's such a expensive meat here. I mean, all meat is pretty expensive here. They charge by the 100 grams, so you can basically multiply the price they're selling it for by like 4.5 to get an American pound.
Yeah.
And so, like, the cheaper meats are 100 yen per 100 grams, which is like $4.50 a pound. But that's for like shredded pork. Mm-hmm. So you can get beef here, but that's like 4 or 500 yen per 100 grams. So you're looking at like $16 a pound or $20 a pound. So it's sort of out of our price range. But in terms of things you can't get, cereal is very hard to find. Basically, we go to the same store that sometimes gets imported food and hope that they have some cereal there. So we bought some bran flakes last week. That same store has stopped stocking peanut butter, so we have no way to get peanut butter for cheap. We can order it on Amazon, or we can go without. And bread, which sounds weird, but you can buy bread. You can always buy bread in square bags of like 5 to 8 slices. So the ingredient list for a Japanese bread goes something like flour, yeast, of course, and then sugar, milk, eggs, and salt. But they use 2 to 3 times as much sugar as an American bread probably would. And American bread usually doesn't necessarily have milk in it at all, if you're just talking like regular sandwich bread. Mm-hmm. So they add like double the sugar and add milk to it. And so you get these breads that are really light and fluffy and taste like garbage. And they love to use shortening instead of butter. And they love to use oil instead of butter and margarine instead of butter because butter is expensive. Mm-hmm. So pretty much all the breads you can find are light, fluffy, sweet, and taste like oil.
Are they chewy?
Somewhat, depending on the real cheap ones are.
Now, you say it's a square loaf of bread. Are there no crust?
Correct.
Like there's crust around the edge, but no...
Yeah, they do not like crusts here. You can buy pre-made sandwiches, and pretty much all pre-made sandwiches have the crusts cut off, and they have tools to cut the crusts off of your bread, and it's like everyone's 6 years old.
I suspect the bread I was buying from Park and Shop is probably very similar, because I would buy bread on a weekly basis in China. My morning breakfast was actually usually a peanut butter jelly sandwich. And the bread was not always great. It was a little sweet usually, and it was chewy to the point where I usually toasted it because it helped it be a little bit less chewy.
If it was a similar kind of bread, you could touch your fingers together through it. Like no matter how thick it was, you could always just like flatten it to a very thin layer.
Yeah, kind of like memory foam, except it never went back.
Yeah, it was basically memory foam bread. Tastes like it, looks like it.
I didn't think it tasted that bad, but
Well, I've become somewhat of a bread connoisseur, and now that I've started making my own bread, we got a bread maker, and I've been making bread at home. And so it is possible to buy peanut butter here from Japanese companies. It's pretty expensive. There's a Snoopy brand with Snoopy from Peanuts on it. What is much more accessible than peanut butter is peanut cream, which the main ingredient of peanut cream is peanut butter, and the second ingredient is sugar. So it's basically like, what if you poured sugar on all your peanut butter? The reason why bread is like that is bread is seen as a dessert food.
Oh.
And so bread toppings, fruit is also seen as a dessert food for the most part. It's seen as very unhealthy and way too sugary and bad for you for the most part. There are exceptions. So you mix all this together, and that makes jam a dessert food.
Mm-hmm.
Bread is a dessert food, so why wouldn't peanut butter be a dessert food too?
Mm-hmm.
But peanut butter's too salty to be a good dessert food, so they add sugar to it, and that's what's popular. So it's definitely been a struggle to find the right kind of bread and peanut butter. For the longest time, they had imported peanut butter at our favorite store, Gyomu Super, and they just stopped handling it. We're wondering if we bought it all and they ran out or something. Because we were buying, 3 containers every other week, at least, minimum.
Do love some peanut butter.
Yeah, and I know I'm talking about peanut butter a lot, but it's a cheap source of protein, which is somewhat hard to get in this country, given that a lot of meat is too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to have meals where there's less meat or just tofu, or a ton of meals with chicken, which doesn't have that much protein. So to keep up, peanut butter is great, but you need peanut butter to eat peanut butter.
One last question. I guess you kind of touched on it a little bit already. Are there a lot of different... You said there were some Chinese restaurants. Is there a lot of other foreign foods around, or...
Right. So in small areas, like rural areas, you can always find Chinese food and Indian food. In slightly larger cities, you can usually find some Korean food too, but outside of those three, it gets very tricky to find any sort of foreign food.
Okay.
In major cities like Hiroshima, we were able to find some American-style places, quote-unquote.
Mm-hmm.
So, in big cities, it's the same everywhere. You can find foreign food. We ate, I think it was Brazilian food when we went to Tokyo, and then Haley got food poisoning from that. So that was fun.
Sad.
Bigger cities always tend to have Hawaiian food as well.
Really?
Which was interesting to me because you can't usually get Hawaiian food in Minnesota, so that was a first. The first time we went to the Hawaiian place, I got a popover. I don't know if you know what those are. I didn't know what those are. It's like a big puffy dough thing with a lot of air inside it that's kind of sweet. And they gave us strawberry butter to put on top of it. But Haley had gone to the bathroom and when the food came. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. What's this pink substance? So I took a little bite of it and I was like, oh, this is pretty good. It's kind of sweet. I wonder if this is like the dessert. And so then I ate it all. And then Haley came back and she was like putting it on her popover. And I was like, wait, you're supposed to put that on the popover? And she was like, yeah, it's butter. And I was like, oh, I just ate all that butter on my own. To be fair, it was pretty good butter, but...
Yeah, I guess living where I was living, I was in a pretty big city and I was really close to some other big cities, so finding foreign food was relatively easy, at least to some extent. I realized as I was preparing for this episode that I have eaten Indian food in 6 different countries.
Oh, wow.
I think. Because I've had it in the US, I've had it in South Korea, Japan, China, Hong Kong, and Macau. And I know Hong Kong and Macau are technically China, but if you tell that to the Hong Kongese or the Macauans, they will not be your friends anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sometime you should go to India and then have real Indian food and see how it stacks up.
That would be a good idea. I think food tours are always fun.
Yeah.
Plan to travel somewhere so you can eat food. Do we want to wrap this up?
I think so. I think we've done pretty good. We could probably even do another episode on some kind of food topic, but we talked about food.
Okay.
Sounds good. So I'm going to stop recording in 3, 2, 1, potato.